possible that these little 12 apostles were blind, gullible puppies, blindly following this heroic Jesus of Nazareth. But when you read about how they responded to Jesus, you can't conclude that. They denied him, they doubted him. Judas Iscariot, one of his 12 closest friends, betrayed him for 30 pieces of silver. These are not blind, true believers. These are skeptics. They're Christ doubters, Christ deniers. Well, guess what, guys? I like that, because that's the way I am. But I can promise you that ups the credibility of the Gospels.
So wouldn't it be a lot easier if, he just came and actually said what he was or isn't, instead of having middlemen come to college campuses and trying to tell us things? Like, why can't we get the source?
Good.
Why can't he just come down?
Well, that's the whole point. He did come down.
No. 2,000 years ago. Like, what's he been doing lately other than making footprints in sand? Like, why can't he come here?
Well, you have a source document. You have the Gospels.
No. Like, that's an ancient book. We want now, today. Like, where has he been? What's he been up to?
Okay, good. God, it's not enough what you've done to reveal yourself. Unless you do X, Y, and Z, you're not going to be privileged enough to have me believe in you. Do you think that smacks of sincerity? If a girl looks you in the face and says, I love you, and you say, really? I don't believe you unless you have sex with me. What do you think of that?
That seems good. I like that.
Just think about it. Because I think your answer that you just gave is the answer to your previous question.
But because I absolutely see you as a middleman. There's God, there's you, and then you're telling us, the herd, the flock, what God says. He's sending you out on a mission. But why can't he be here? Why can't he come out of the heavens and split the ground and all kinds of good science fiction effects and, that would be so much easier. It would clear up a lot of confusion, and we'd be good to go for the rest of human eternity. Now that we have technology to record it rather than...
And the answer to that is...
I'm going to burn it.
God respects your freedom. Respect his freedom. God doesn't play games with you. Don't play games with him. It's a game, sir. You're playing a game. And the game is, in order for me to believe in you, you have to do this. And if you don't do this, I'm not going to believe in you. Watch out. That's a trap. And if you treat a human being that way, you're going to have incredibly superficial friendships.
Well, that's based on the presupposition that there is a God.
No, forget that. And that is false. You stepped forward, you painted the scenario. I didn't. I'm responding to the scenario you pictured. Now, that was a neat trick you tried to play there, but it's dishonest. Totally dishonest. You stepped forward, you set the scenario. The scenario you set was, hey, why doesn't God perform more miracles today? Then I would believe in him. That's the scenario you set. And I'm pointing out to you how dishonest that is in approaching a personal being that way. If a girl says to you, I really love you, and you look her in the face and say, you know something? I don't believe you unless you have sex with me. You are one crass manipulator.
You said more miracles, but they didn't have any understanding of gravity back then or oxygen. So why to their 2,000-year opinion of the way world is, how does that compare to what we have when we have knowledge? So what I'm saying is, how come the miracles can't happen today? Because you said more miracles, so you assume that the snake talked and the sea was split and he came back from the dead. But why can't that happen now?
Miracles do happen now, but they don't happen on command. They don't happen for some cynical person who says, hey God, do you want to have the privilege of me believing in you? Which is obviously total human arrogance. Hey, why don't you do this miracle and then I'll believe in you? Instead, God respects your freedom. He doesn't force you to believe. He doesn't manipulate you. He says, here's the evidence that I love you. Here's the evidence that I care for you. Now you have to make your own decision.
It's not manipulative that God creates us to love him. Like if I had an ant farm,
yes,
would I demand that the ants love me? And if they don't, they're going to go to ant hell?
If you create the ants for a purpose, then it would behoove the ants to live out the purpose for which they were made.
my friend brought up a good point, which I feel like we may disagree a little bit upon. He was saying that the claim that Jesus led a perfect life, sinless life, isn't really met by the evidence, even of the Gospels, because they don't account for every single moment of his life, which you claim to be ridiculous, but given the extraordinary claim, it seems like that's what's required in order to have a justified belief in that.
Well, I think you're making the same mistake that Descartes made. Descartes was trying to say that unless I can believe something is true, you have to be able to prove it to me. I think that's a ridiculously naive approach to truth and to life. Sir, I can prove almost nothing. But that doesn't mean I can't make decisions. I make decisions based on evidence, not proof. And I think if you look at your life, you're no different from me.
Well, I'm a little bit different than you, but...
Yeah, well, obviously you're a little different from me. And you're fortunate that you are different from me in certain ways, okay? So, I mean, I pray you'll come to put your faith in Christ, but I don't pray that you be just exactly like me. That would not be good in all situations, I can promise you. But I think if you look at your life, you've got to acknowledge, I cannot base my life on proof. I base my life on evidence. I mean, if you're in ROTC, can you prove to me the United States government is not going to rip you off? No. If you're paying the University of Arizona lots of money to enroll here, can you prove to me that on your day of graduation, the University of Arizona is going to grant you a diploma? Maybe on your day of graduation, the University of Arizona is going to say, hey, you know something? Let's break tradition. No diplomas this year.
Oh, no.
It's possible, right? Anything's possible. But the reason you're so committed to this fine institution is because the evidence is you complete your courses and you'll get a diploma. You don't prove it, but the evidence points in that direction.
Yeah, but it's not so much a solid something that's akin to a mathematical proof. It's more the ability to disprove it. For example, you don't need, if I were to make the claim that I had a perfect life, you wouldn't need an entire account because you would just be able to say, oh, I saw you trip an old lady yesterday, or something like that.
Good point.
It seems like if we're going to have little bits and pieces of Jesus' life missing here, especially that 30 years of the gap in the Gospels, there's a very good possibility that he could have sinned or whatever, or erred in some way.
Theoretically, it's possible, I agree. But I can promise you, sir, if I live with you closely for 3 years, and if I never see you sin once, that's going to blow me out of the water. I'm going to be really impressed.
Or I just sin behind your back, too. But I know what you mean.
Well, I mean, if I track with you, I mean, if we're close friends, like if we're roommates for 4 years at the University of Arizona, and if I never see you sin once, you're always compassionate, always honest. Your integrity is pure and spotless. I mean, that's pretty incredible. I'm going to be blown out of the water by you. That's incredibly fine.
Yeah, and that sounds good, but what I'm saying is that that's a good bit of inductive reasoning, but I don't think that's enough reasoning to back up the claim that he led a perfect life.
All right. But you see, when other people say to me, I've never sinned, their friends laugh. There was one student at MIT who raised his hand and he said, Cliff, I've never sinned once. Well, I stood there with a poker face, but all of his classmates burst into laughter. So when Jesus makes this claim that he's a sinless life, I mean, why doesn't everybody break out laughing? What kind of an idiot are you, Christ, claiming to be a sinless person? And yet they didn't break out in laughter. Instead they said, yeah, the guy lived a sinless life.
But I don't think so other people didn't laugh. I don't think that's good reason to believe him. I mean, maybe they're just really gullible.
Yeah, maybe they are gullible. That's a possibility.
It is, and we have all these possibilities of it turning out that he didn't lead a perfect life. So
you bet.
I don't think the belief is justified.
Okay, but when you read the Gospels, you're right, I'm looking for gullibility. And when you read the Gospels, you'll notice his bravest follower, Peter, denies knowing him 3 times. Is that gullibility? Is that blind faith? No. Peter believed in Christ, but he also doubted. He doubted to the point of denying he even knew Christ 3 times. You read the Gospels and you bump into a guy named Thomas. And yeah, Thomas was one of the 12 apostles. But Jesus was such an ineffective communicator that when the other apostles said, hey, Thomas, Jesus is risen from the dead, Thomas said, no, I don't believe it. Not unless I can see it with my own eyes. Not unless I can take my hands and put them in the nail prints in his hands will I believe. Well, I like that. That's like me. I doubt. But when the evidence is consistently pointing in a direction, I got to follow the evidence. So you're right, it's possible that these little 12 apostles were blind, gullible puppies, blindly following this heroic Jesus of Nazareth. But when you read about how they responded to Jesus, you can't conclude that. They denied him, they doubted him. Judas Iscariot, one of his 12 closest friends, betrayed him for 30 pieces of silver. These are not blind, true believers. These are skeptics. They're Christ doubters, Christ deniers. Well, guess what, guys? I like that, because that's the way I am. But I can promise you that ups the credibility of the Gospels, because they're recording all the doubts, all the skepticism.
Well, if you're going to bring in the credibility of the Gospels, I mean, I think we talked about this a little bit before. I don't find them to be very credible. I mean,
why?
Okay, yeah, like, I mean, last night you said it's not like telephone, but I feel that it really is like telephone.
How?
So we have information starting at one point, it's passing through certain people, let's say it's 8 people or something like that. Even then, it tends to get misinterpreted, changed a little bit, or something like that.
Sure.
So, if we have something like that, I'm not going to believe that the information is the same as the original point. So if we change it to eyewitness testimony and things like that over a few thousand years, I'm not sure if I'm going to believe that anymore.
Okay.
Especially given that a lot of the things in the Bible seem to be Jesus talking, which is a very specific event. And that doesn't seem like a very credible thing to me, that they were able to replicate exactly what he said, if he even said it to begin with. Because, for example, miraculous things were written about Alexander the Great, but I don't believe those either. But even then, those weren't on the small scale of everyday conversations between people. Those are about actual major events. So if I'm not going to believe the major events, which seem miraculous, why would I believe the Gospels, which were small events? That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
But Alexander the Great never claimed to be God in human form. He never claimed to be a prophet of God. Obviously, Alexander the Great claimed to be a very committed general, leader of an army. And he was obviously a tremendously successful, talented general, leader of armies. And so history chronicles how he led those armies to victory after victory after victory. Now, when myths grow up around Alexander the Great or around George Washington about him throwing $1 across the Potomac or whatever, because you study the literary style, and when these myths grew up and you begin to study folklore, you begin to realize, no, George Washington wasn't this mythological figure who did all these things. He was a real historical person, and this is what he did. And then look at how the myth grew up around him, or Alexander the Great. But with Jesus Christ, you don't have an historical person who myth grows up around. Instead, you've got this historical person claiming to be God in human form, and right from the get-go, he's performing miracles. And these miracles are not added to his life later on to give it some zest and some punch and some persuasiveness. See, Acts chapter 2 records Peter standing up 50 days after the resurrection. Peter looks into the face of his listeners and says, "You killed the Christ. God raised him from the dead, and we are all eyewitnesses of this fact." And the people don't say, "Oh, no, you're wrong. Christ didn't rise from the dead." People knows the facts, and the facts is, these people claim to have seen Christ risen from the dead. This is 50 days after the resurrection, and Peter's going head-to-head with them. Nobody can say, "Oh, no, we found the dead body. Oh, no, we know about the plot." No, they can't. Right from the get-go, the eyewitness testimony is, we saw Christ dead, we saw him risen from the dead, you guys killed him, he's the Christ, he's the Son of the Blessed.
Yeah, that's my point. It's eyewitness testimony for something that isn't physically possible. I mean, a miracle.
There you go.
And there are other things. I mean, so first you have to, just like you said last night, you have to accept a supernatural being in order to accept a supernatural occurrence. And it seems a little circular. You have to accept supernatural before you accept supernatural claims.
Well, no, it's not circular. In order for a miracle to happen, there has to be a supernatural God. Obviously, if there's no supernatural God, it is impossible for a miracle to happen, right? Because if there's no supernatural God, all of reality is natural order. And you don't have a miracle occurring in natural order. Right? So in order to have a miracle, you've got to have a supernatural God who chooses to change a natural law. All right, what is Jesus doing when he's turning water into wine? He's changing a law. And the law is not that water never turns into wine. Obviously, water does turn into wine, but it goes through a process of being in a grape and then fermenting. Obviously, Jesus is speeding up that natural process, and he's turning water directly into wine. Obviously, when Jesus walks on water, you don't do that. Why? Because gravity pulls you right down into water. He's changing a natural law. He's a supernatural God. Obviously, when Jesus raises a dead person to life, he's changing a natural law. So obviously, the only way a miracle can happen is if there's a supernatural God who created these natural laws in the first place, and then he's got the power to change these natural laws. That's why you have to figure out, does the evidence point to a supernatural God existing, or does it not? And if you conclude there's no supernatural God because there's no evidence to support a supernatural God, then obviously Jesus did not rise from the dead, because it's impossible, if there's no supernatural God, for a dead person to rise from the dead. It's impossible.
What's the evidence of the soul? What's your evidence of the soul?
My evidence for a soul is free will, love, conscience, independent rational mind.
How do you test for this?
I test for it by self-reflection, judging myself, analyzing myself, saying, Cliff, when you did that, that was boneheaded. When you did this, that was good.
How do you know that's the soul and not just some mistake you're making or some emotional thing? How do you know it's the soul?
Well, we don't have to call it a soul. It's me. It's me that goes beyond my chemical drive. I have a sex drive. Now, I don't have to do whatever my sex drive tells me. 3 years ago, I was speaking out here, and there was a guy right over here who said, yes, I date rape. And I don't think it's wrong. I said, okay, fine. Why don't you think date rape is wrong? He said, because I have a very high testosterone level. And see, he was being consistent with his worldview that said, I don't have a soul. I don't have a free will. I just do what my genetic makeup programs me to do. My experience is, I have sexual desires, and I don't have to put them into practice. I can control them. My experience is, I really hate some people who've treated me rather despicably, but I don't have to continue to hate them. I can choose to forgive them. Now, to be honest with you, Benjamin, at times I've hated them, and I'm embarrassed by that. But I know that I've also been able to change, and with the help of Christ, love people who naturally I would hate. Let me give you one quick example. I went to college to play major college basketball down in North Carolina. But there was an assistant basketball coach who would stand on the sidelines, and every time I'd make a bad pass, every time I'd make a bad shot, he would mock me. Stupid. Look at the chicken out there. Knechtle, can't play ball worth squat. My teammates would come to me and say, Cliff, what have you done against this guy? Did he treat you like a piece of dirt? And I'd say, I don't know. But I can promise you, Benjamin, I had some major bitterness and hatred towards that guy. I tried to love him, Benjamin. I tried to care about the guy. I failed time and time again. I hated his guts. If he would have died, I would have been celebrating at his funeral, to tell you the truth. And it wasn't until I reached the point where I said, Christ, I need your help. I tried to love the guy and I failed repeatedly. And Christ helped me to love a man who I hated on my own.
You know, I've had similar hatred toward people, but I've been able to restrain myself without a belief in Christ. It's,
Good.
Through ethical measures.
And isn't that your free will? Isn't that the real Benjamin choosing not to hate?
I guess, but it's constrained, by certain events.
Right.
It's not just, something I feel that I was born with this, to not go kill this guy or whatever.
When certain people have hurt me very deeply, my knee-jerk response is to hit them as hard as I can. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to deliberate about it. If someone cuts me off at the knees, my knee-jerk reaction is, I'm going to cut you off at the knees.
That's not my knee-jerk reaction.
Okay? Good. Well, that's great. But, Benjamin, I think if you look over your life with a fine-tooth comb, you'll have to acknowledge that too frequently your knee-jerk reaction has been selfishness, thoughtlessness.
Doubt it, no.
Oh, come on,
Not so much. Of course, there's selfishness here and there, but as a whole, no. I would say the majority is not selfishness. Maybe some people are like that, but you can't take one person and assume the entire species is like that. So.
Benjamin, I used to think that I was a really selfless guy. Then I got married. And I can promise you, Benjamin, being married to a woman showed me very clearly how selfish I am. Then I thought I got over my selfishness. Then we had 3 boys. Then I really found out how selfish I am. Human selfishness is deeply ingrained.
Hey, I've been to many priests, and I've asked them what is actually necessary to get into heaven. They tell me that you need to live a just life, and that you need to be kind to your neighbor, and then you have to believe that Jesus is your Lord and Savior. And I asked them, well, what if there's some really holy person that believes in really respecting their neighbor? Their whole life they devote to helping out their community, very not selfish at all, and they just don't believe that Jesus is their Lord. Would they not go to heaven? And the response is no, they wouldn't, because that is a very big sin to not believe that Jesus is your Lord. And I say this to you, this is my question, is if I held a gun to your head and I said you have 20 seconds or X amount of time to believe that the tooth fairy really exists, honestly believe that the tooth fairy exists, you wouldn't be able to do it, because you know the tooth fairy doesn't exist, and as much as you want to live, you can't force yourself to believe in them. And there's people out there that couldn't believe in God. They don't believe in God, and even if they really, really wanted to, they couldn't, because it's this false thing in the back of their head. They know they don't truly believe in it. And if that's so, then God is sentencing people to live in eternal damnation, and it doesn't make sense to me. Can you please clear it up?
That is a great point you make. I love your thinking. If you were to offer me $5,000 right now, if I believe that the pink elephant is sitting right here, I couldn't do it. Because my mind tells me there is no pink elephant there. And I don't care how much money you offer me. I can't force myself to believe that the pink elephant is sitting there.
Even if you want to.
And I obviously would want to. If you offered me 5 to 10 grand, I would want to believe that, okay? And you're absolutely right. Even though I want to believe the pink elephant is here in order to get your 10 grand, I can't really. Oh, I can tell you, okay, fine, I believe the pink elephant's right here. But you and I both know that because my mind revolts 100% against that, I don't really believe the pink elephant is here. All right. So your point is, what happens if a person just genuinely can't believe that God exists?
Not can, but just doesn't. And even if they really want to, they know in the back of their mind that it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
God does not make sense. Okay. There are 2 responses to that for me, from my part. The first point is, have you studied and thought through the evidence that God has left regarding his existence? Now, there's some people sitting here right now who will say, yes, Cliff, I have thought the evidence through, and it's not enough. Therefore, I don't believe in God. Here's my second point. When you say, it is not enough, What you're communicating to me is that you have a standard of evidence that must be met before you can believe something. No problem, I'm with you. Now, my question to you is, what or who are you living for, and what is the evidence that whatever it is you're living for meets that standard of evidence? Sir, I've been speaking on university campuses for 30 years. I've been debating some of the most brilliant professors on campuses for 30 years. I have never met one person who has been able to show me that due to the fact that there's not enough evidence for God's existence, due to the fact that there's not enough evidence for Christ, this other option is better because there is more evidence to support this option than there is evidence to support God and Christ.
I'm not saying to believe in something else, though. I'm saying someone that truly wants to believe in God and wants to be involved with Jesus and everything else like that. But in the back of their mind, they know that because there's all this doubt, it's hard for them. And in so doing, I mean, God doesn't want someone to go to heaven just because they want to go to heaven. Oh, I'm going to believe in God because I don't want to go to hell. Or, oh, I want to believe in God for, eternal happiness. He wants them to believe in God because of love, because of caring, and because they know that that's part of it.
Yes. Why did you go out and play in traffic on the interstate?
Oh, you actually asked me?
Yeah, why don't you go out and play in traffic on the interstate?
I don't really fancy it that much.
Good, why? Why don't you fancy it?
I don't want to die.
Thank you. Same here. The reason I do not go out and play in traffic on the interstate is because I don't want to end up on the bumper of a Mack truck. Is that selfish of me?
No.
Thank you. No, that is not selfish of me. Rather, that is an affirmation of life. So I'm not going to go out onto interstate and play in traffic. Why? Because I don't want to end up on the bumper of a Mack truck. Is that selfish of me? No. It's an affirmation of my value of life. I value my life, therefore I don't want to get run over by a Mack truck. Is there something selfish of me when I say I want to live life after death? No. It's an affirmation of life. I affirm life. I hate death. Jesus Christ said, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies. He affirms life. I affirm life. Hey, we got a match here.
But that's not the problem.
What's the problem then?
The problem is not with you specifically, it's with God. If God only accepts those 100% accepting of him, then if someone can't accept him, he has ruled out those trying to.
Sir, nobody ever believes in God 100%. I doubt. Everybody doubts. Every atheist doubts. Every agnostic doubts. Every Christian doubts. Every Muslim doubts. Every Buddhist doubts. We all doubt. The question is, how are you going to handle your doubts? What are you going to do with them? Are you going to allow your doubts to harden into unbelief?